When you drive dark, rural highways in the middle of the night, a safety routine is everything. You check in, you lock your doors, and you never, ever pull over. In 1997, 26-year-old Kim Medlin was only 10 minutes from home when she made her final check-in call. She never arrived. This is her story with your host, Evelyn Black, and this, my friends, is Hooked on Homicide.
Hello, my fellow morbid darlings, and welcome back to another episode of Hooked on Homicide. If you're new here, I'm Evelyn Black, and with this podcast, we're going to unravel some of the most dark and twisted cases, one stitch at a time. So, with that being said, let's dive into today's case. Today, we are diving into a case from 1997, and this case completely shattered the quiet, tight-knit community of Monroe, North Carolina. It's a story of a young woman's horrific murder, an investigation full of terrifying dead ends, and a final, chilling twist that no one in the town saw coming. This, my morbid friends, is the murder of Kim Medlin. Now, to understand the tragic loss of Kimberly Jo Medlin, you first have to understand the vibrant, driven life she was building. Born Kimberly Millen in December 1970 in Michigan, Kim, as everyone called her, was the kind of person who filled a room. Friends and family described her as gregarious, warm, and unapologetically alive. She had striking blonde hair, an infectious smile, and a deep, lifelong love for the outdoors. But more specifically, Kim loved horses. Her ultimate driving dream was to one day own a horse farm, a sanctuary where she could spend her days working with the animals she loved. In 1991, while living in Charlotte, North Carolina, Kim crossed paths with a local DJ named Bridger Medlin. And my friends, when I say that the attraction was immediate, it was definitely immediate. You see, Bridger was charmed by Kim's energy. And Kim, she loved his drive. And they fell hard and fast, getting engaged just 8 months after meeting and marrying in September of 1994. The couple decided to lay their roots in Bridger's hometown of Monroe, a small, quiet, quintessential southern city about 30 miles southeast of Charlotte. Together, they took a massive step towards Kim's lifelong dream, buying a beautiful 7-acre plot of farmland. They started with a barn, acquiring a few horses to care for, and then began the grueling work of constructing their home from the ground up. But as we all know, dreams, they require capital, and both Kim and Bridger were willing to hustle for it. Bridger traveled frequently, pulling long hours DJing at events, and Kim matched his work ethic step for step. She held down multiple jobs, but her primary income came from working the night shift as a cocktail waitress at a high-end adult entertainment venue in Charlotte, and this place was called the Men's Club. Working at a club like this meant 2 things. 1, the money was absolutely fantastic, and it allowed them to fund their farm. And 2, the hours were brutal. Kim routinely clocked out between 2 and 3 in the morning. Driving 30 miles alone on dark rural highways in the dead of night is unnerving for anyone. I know I hate it. I wouldn't want to do it. But Kim was street smart, and she didn't take any chances. She and Bridger established a strict safety protocol. Every night, without fail, Kim would call Bridger the moment she left work to let him know she was on the road. Oftentimes, she would even call a second time, letting him know she was crossing the county line just minutes from home. It was a routine that kept them both sane until the night that routine was broken. Okay, guys, so this is where I'm going to start breaking down the timeline of what happened. So bear with me, pay close attention, because this is very, very insane. Okay, so Friday, March 28th, 1997. It began like any other weekend. Bridger had booked a lucrative gig DJing a high school prom in South Carolina. And Kim, she headed into Charlotte for her usual Friday night shift. Fast forwarding to the early hours of Saturday, March 29th at approximately 2 a.m., Kim finishes her shift. She changes out of her work clothes into a baggy inside-out sweatshirt. She then walks out to the parking lot and gets into her car. Now, Kim drove a very distinct vehicle, and its description is very important for future information. So, her vehicle was a bright red Jeep Wrangler outfitted with custom black and white cowhide seat covers. Sounds so cute. Anyways, at 2:15 a.m., true to their protocol, Kim dials Bridger. Bridger is also on the road, exhausted, but making good time on his drive back. They chat briefly. Everything is fine. At around 2:45 a.m., Bridger pulls into the driveway of their property in Monroe. He walks inside, expecting to see his wife, but the house is empty. He calculates the drive time and concludes that she should have been home by now. So as any husband would do, he picks up the phone and calls her cell. Kim answers. The connection is a bit fuzzy, but she does tell him she's passing Union Station. I'll be home in about 10 to 15 minutes, she says. Bridger, fighting heavy eyelids, tells his wife he loves her and that he'll wait up. He sits down, but the exhaustion of the long drive catches up to him, and he drifts off to sleep. Bridger then jolts awake. He's disoriented as he had been sleeping, and so he looks at the clock. The glowing red numbers read 3:59 a.m. Over an hour has passed since Kim said she was 10 minutes away. The house was deafeningly silent. Panic began to set in, and Bridger immediately grabs the phone and dials Kim's cell. It rings and rings, and then finally there's a click. But the voice on the other end isn't Kim's. It's a deep, unfamiliar male voice. Hello, the voice says. Bridger demands to know who is answering his wife's phone, and the man on the other end identifies himself. He is an officer with the Monroe Public Safety Department. Just 15 minutes prior, at 3:45 a.m., dispatch had received calls from passing motorists. They reported a suspicious vehicle parked on the grassy shoulder of Old Charlotte Highway. When police arrived on the scene, they found Kim's bright red Jeep Wrangler. The scene was deeply unsettling. The Jeep's engine was still running, purring loudly in the quiet night, and the headlights were piercing the pitch-black darkness. And the driver's side window was completely rolled down. When officers shined their flashlights inside, the custom cowhide seats were empty. There was absolutely no sign of a struggle. No blood, no scuff marks, no broken glass. On the passenger seat, sitting perfectly undisturbed, was Kim's open purse. Inside of it, her cell phone rested next to her wallet. Her cash was still there, and her credit cards were untouched. Only one single item was missing from her vehicle: Kimberly Medlin's driver's license. When Bridger arrives at the scene of the abandoned Jeep, he is frantic. By dawn, the Monroe Police Department has launched a massive search effort. Family members, friends, and local volunteers flooded the area, combing through the woods and fields surrounding Old Charlotte Highway. The search drags on for an agonizing 30 hours. Bridger and Kim's family live in a state of suspended terror, and I can't even imagine what they must have been feeling. But then, on the evening of March 30th, around 6:30 p.m., the ticking clock stops. Two search volunteers are canvassing an industrial cul-de-sac. It's a dead-end road about 2 miles away from the red Jeep was found. At the very end of that road, beneath a haphazard pile of roofing shingles, a wooden pallet, and thick brush, they spot something. It is the brutalized body of Kim Medlin. The discovery sends shockwaves through Monroe. The autopsy report paints a horrifying picture of Kim's final moments. She had been brutally beaten. Her skull and cervical spine were fractured. Her hyoid bone was broken, a definitive indicator of manual strangulation. Furthermore, the medical examiner found a distinct footprint bruised onto Kim's back, revealing that her attacker had physically stomped on her while she was on the ground. My gosh, that poor woman. But there was another detail that sent a chill down the spines of the investigators. Kim's wrists showed distinct, patterned bruising. The marks were entirely consistent with having been bound by heavy metal restraints. Yet, whatever had bound her was gone. The killer had removed them. So, motive is the first thing investigators look for, typically. Was this a robbery? I mean, clearly not. Her cash and cards were left inside the Jeep, and she was still wearing her gold necklace and her wedding ring. Could this have been a sexual assault? The medical examiner noted that there were no definitive forensic signs of sexual assault, though police knew they couldn't rule it out as the initial intent. Based on evidence, detectives form a working theory. Kim had been intercepted, taken from her Jeep, and brought to this isolated cul-de-sac. The evidence suggested she had managed to escape her attacker's vehicle and sprinted into the darkness. It was then that the attacker chased her down, struck her from behind, stomped on her back, strangled her, and then dragged her body into the brush. But who would do this? And how did they get Kim out of her car without a struggle? In any homicide investigation, especially one involving a married woman, the police immediately turn their magnifying glass onto the spouse. We know this. It is a standard procedure. Suspicion heavily fell on Bridger. The rumor mill went into overdrive. People whispered in diners, and some individuals even harassed Bridger's family. The police pressure on Bridger escalated dramatically when a local officer claimed he had seen Bridger's distinct black pickup truck driving through the streets around 2:30 a.m., the exact time Bridger claimed to be asleep in bed. So detectives bring Bridger in, and he cooperates fully. And when investigators actually look at the hard data, the case against the husband disintegrates. Bridger's cell phone records align perfectly with his timeline. But the nail in the coffin comes from a local bank. Detectives pull surveillance footage from an ATM overlooking the intersection where the officer claimed to see his truck. And that camera proved Bridger's truck did not pass through at 2:30 a.m. It only appears on the footage after 4 a.m., the exact time he was frantically speeding toward the abandoned Jeep. So Bridger is officially cleared. But before he leaves the station, he hands the detectives a crucial, terrifying piece of the puzzle. He tells them exactly 2 weeks before the murder, on March 15th, Kim had come home trembling and terrified. She had been the victim of a severe road rage incident, and it happened on the exact same stretch of Old Charlotte Highway where her Jeep was found. According to Bridger, Kim had been driving home when a car containing 2 men began aggressively tailgating her, flashing their high beams and trying to run her off the road. What assholes. Anyway, panicked, Kim had floored it until she saw a safe haven, a parking lot where 2 Monroe police cruisers were sitting. She swerved in, jumped out, and ran to the officers, begging them for help. The officers immediately pursued the aggressive vehicle and pulled the 2 men over. The men, of course, tried to flip the script, claiming that Kim was the one driving recklessly. But with no damage to the vehicles and no independent witnesses, the officers had to let the men go with a warning. But Kim was visibly shaken. One of the veteran officers on duty that night saw her distress, took her aside, and made her a promise. He told her that he would make sure that the night shift kept a special eye out for her. He picked up his radio and broadcasted a message to the entire department, alerting all working officers to be on the lookout for a blonde woman driving a red Jeep Wrangler in the early morning hours to ensure she got home safe. Armed with this new information, detectives immediately hunt down the 2 men involved in the road rage incident. Could they have tracked her down 2 weeks later for revenge? I mean, crazier things have happened, right? So the men are brought in and interrogated. But once again, the hard evidence ruins the theory. Both of those men have rock solid, corroborated alibis for the night of the murder. They were nowhere near Old Charlotte Highway. So the investigation hits a brick wall. But Bridger Medlin keeps pushing a specific theory to the detectives. He knows his wife, and he knows just how street smart she was, especially after the road rage incident terrifying her just 2 weeks prior. Bridger points out the facts of the crime scene. The Jeep was pulled over safely. The engine was left idling. The window was rolled down. And her purse and money were left in plain sight. But yet, the only thing missing was her driver's license. Kim would never, ever pull over on a dark country road in the middle of the night for a stranger, Bridger insists. If an unmarked car bumped her, she would have kept driving. If someone waved her down, she would have ignored them. He then looks the detectives in the eye and tells them his chilling theory. And I quote, "There is only one type of person Kim would roll her window down for at 3 a.m. A figure of authority." End quote. The blue light bandit theory is now born. Investigators begin to seriously consider the possibility that a local predator has equipped their personal vehicle with flashing blue lights, impersonating a police officer to pull over vulnerable women. This terrifying theory gains massive traction a few days later when a witness finally works up the courage to come forward. This witness is a local man who had been driving on Old Charlotte Highway around 3 a.m. the night of the murder. He tells police he saw a red Jeep Wrangler pulled over on the shoulder, and parked directly behind it was a vehicle with flashing blue lights. What the fuck? So why didn't he stop or report it? Well, because he was driving on a suspended license. He didn't want to go near a traffic stop, but he specifically noted it because he had been driving behind the Jeep for quite a while, and he was fairly certain that the driver hadn't been speeding or swerving, that this driver had done absolutely nothing wrong to warrant being pulled over. The police now have a witness confirming a traffic stop. The entire town is now terrified. A man with fake police lights is hunting women on the highway. But who is the blue light bandit? The answer doesn't come from a witness. It actually comes from a laboratory. While detectives are chasing down the impersonator theory, the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation, SBI, is meticulously analyzing the physical evidence. Latent evidence expert Ricky Navarro focuses his attention on the oversized sweatshirt Kim had been wearing. Navarro knows about the faint bruise on Kim's back. You know, the footprint left by her killer. He hopes that whatever shoe made that bruise might have transferred microscopic dirt or dust into the fabric. So using alternate light sources, specialized forensic lights that operate at different wavelengths, and high-speed cameras, Navarro examines the back of the sweatshirt. Slowly, under the specialized lights, a faint pattern emerges. It, my friends, is a partial shoe print. Navarro isolates the image and digitally enhances it. The print is highly distinct. It features a very specific chevron or V-shaped pattern on the heel. Navarro sends the tread pattern out to shoe manufacturers across the country. And within days, he gets a hit. A shoe company based in Wisconsin called Thorogood recognizes the design immediately. They tell Navarro exactly what make and model of shoe left the print. It's a heavy-duty, hard-soled uniform boot. In fact, the company representative notes, this specific boot is almost exclusively purchased in bulk. By, can you guess it? Do you guys know what I'm going to say? Do you? It is exclusively purchased in bulk by none other than law enforcement agencies. Bah, bah, bah. Man, this is just insane. Sorry. So Navarro relays this information to the Monroe Police Department, and a heavy, suffocating silence falls over the precinct. And that silence falls because Thorogood uniform boots aren't just worn by police in general. Those boots are the exact standard issue required footwear for none other than the Monroe Police Department. Shit is getting real now. So, armed with this very heavy information, they soon realize that the killer wasn't a predator buying fake blue lights off the internet. The killer was one of their own. The investigation violently snaps inward. Detectives are no longer hunting a stranger. They are hunting the person sitting at the desk next to them. So the metal restraints that bruised Kim's wrists, those were handcuffs. And the figure of authority she pulled over for was a real badge. The SBI continues to analyze the footprint, and based on the distance between the heel and the ball of the foot, they were able to calculate the exact size of the boot. And that size was a men's 8.5. The Monroe Police Department has roughly 150 officers. Detectives quietly pull the quartermaster's records, the logs detailing exactly what equipment was issued to which officers. And they cross-reference every officer with Thorogood boots size 8.5. And that list began to narrow down to exactly 3 men. The next thing detectives look at is the duty logs for the night of March 28th. The first officer in question was working, but he was stationed at the local firehouse on standby, and multiple witnesses confirmed that he never left the building. The second officer was actively responding to a commercial burglary alarm. Holy moly. Say that 3 times. Let me try that again. The second officer was actively responding to a commercial burglary alarm across the town during the entire window of Kim's murder. He was in constant radio contact. Therefore, there was no way he was the killer. So, if Officer 1 and Officer 2 were both preoccupied the entire time, that left just one officer. And that third officer was working the night shift. He was out on patrol. And guess what? He was all alone in his cruiser. Now, this officer's name is Josh Griffin. He is a 23-year-old rookie. And in a sickening, devastating twist of fate, Josh Griffin is the biological son of the veteran officer who had broadcasted Kim's description 2 weeks prior to, quote, keep her safe. So that means that the father had unknowingly handed his predator's son a target. Wow. I can't even imagine what his father must feel like knowing this. But as detectives secretly zero in on Josh Griffin, a deeply disturbing pattern of behavior comes to light. When questioned under the pressure of internal homicide investigation, multiple officers admit that ever since his father's radio broadcast, Josh had developed a bizarre obsession with Kim Medlin. He had explicitly talked over the police radio about the, quote, blonde babe driving the red Jeep, telling other officers he wanted to run her plates and, quote, find a way to meet her. And if that's not bad enough, fellow officers also admitted that Josh Griffin had a known history of conducting illegal, fraudulent traffic stops, that he would regularly flip his blue lights on and pull over attractive young women for absolutely no reason other than to harass them and ask for their numbers. His colleagues had covered for him, and I'm sorry, they should be punished as well if they were covering for this type of behavior. But anyways, back to the story. So they covered for him, dismissing it as a young rookie being overly aggressive. No one, and I mean absolutely no one, stopped him. So detectives bring the 23-year-old rookie into the interrogation room. They ask him to recount his movements on the night of March 28th. And just as any other criminal does, Josh claims that his shift working an off-duty security detail ended at 10 p.m. and that he then went straight home and slept through the night. But, as we all know, that was bullshit. And so detectives pull out his cell phone records, which prove he was wide awake, parked in his patrol car at a diner located directly at the intersection where Kim's Jeep was found. He was there at 2 a.m., lying in wait. Next, detectives ask him to surrender his police-issued Thorogood boots. And this is when Josh decides to tell another lie. You see, Josh claims he stepped in battery acid during a traffic accident a few days prior, ruining the boots, and therefore he threw them away in a random dumpster. What in the world? Oh, this is so infuriating. But finally, crime scene investigators seize his patrol car. And you see, Josh's cruiser was notoriously the dirtiest in all of the fleet. But what do you know? When investigators open the doors, they find the interior of his cruiser spotless. It had been immaculately cleaned, and it smelled heavily of cleaning chemicals. On May 30th, 1997, exactly 1 month after Kim's body was pulled from the brush, Officer Josh Griffin is arrested. He is stripped of his badge, his gun, and his uniforms, and charged with first-degree murder and first-degree kidnapping. At trial, the prosecution lays out the chilling timeline. Knowing Kim's routine, Griffin waited in the dark, and when the red Jeep drove by, he pulled out and flipped on his blue lights. Kim, trusting the badge, pulled over safely and handed over her license. It was then that Griffin abused his authority to order her out of her vehicle. And that is where he handcuffed her and placed her in the back of his cruiser to make sexual advances. But Kim fought back. The prosecution theorized that Kim threatened to report him. Realizing his career and freedom were over, Griffin drove to the isolated cul-de-sac. And then when he opened the door, Kim jumped from the vehicle and ran. Griffin then chased her down and then bludgeoned her with his heavy metal police flashlight, stomped on her back with his Thorogood boot, and strangled her to death. Once she was dead, he then removed the handcuffs to eliminate evidence linking back to law enforcement, and then disposed of her body in the brush. Despite his tearful denials on the stand, the jury saw through Griffin's lies, and I am so glad they did. And with that being said, he was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. 3 years later, in 2001, Griffin finally reached out to investigators and requested a meeting. He supposedly wanted to confess. This bastard spun a fabricated story about being forced to kill Kim by drug dealers over a steroid debt. Oh my goodness. You just can't make this shit up. This is so ridiculous. Anyways, but amidst all of the lies, he finally admitted to the physical acts. He confessed to stomping on her back, crushing her throat with his flashlight, and handcuffing her. He admitted to then throwing his boots into a Kmart dumpster, and that he solved the mystery of one of the missing items from the crime scene. He had taken Kim's driver's license, cut it into tiny pieces with scissors, and flushed it down a toilet. Bridger Medlin was not surprised by the confession. You see, he told reporters, and I quote, "I'm glad for his conscience that he can finally admit to it, but we knew it. There will be no doubt now," end quote. It took some time, but Bridger eventually found a way to carry on Kim's memory. He did this by building a horse carriage tour company and by caring for over a dozen horses on the very farm they started together. Kimberly Medlin was a young woman who did absolutely everything right. She worked grueling hours to build a life she loved. She had strict safety protocols in place. And when she felt threatened by strangers on a dark road, she did the exact thing we are all taught to do. She turned to the police for help. I think the most tragic and infuriating reality about this case is that it was her respect for the law that her killer exploited. Thank you all for listening to this case. And if you take anything away from the sad and tragic story of Kim, I hope that it is to more so trust yourself than anyone else. You know, a badge doesn't matter. I think that we've had plenty of examples over the years that ultimately it is not a police officer, it is not a spouse, it is not a friend, it is not a superhero that is going to save you at the end of everything. It's yourself. So, again, thank you all for listening. And as always, while death may be inevitable, my sweet, sweet, morbid darlings, that doesn't mean it has to be tonight. Be smart, be safe, and I'll see you next time.